So, again, against the usual reproach, is this not idealism? I would say that today it is rather idealism which is materialist. Today's opposition, I'm tempted to claim, between materialism and idealism is that today's idealism, or rather spiritualism, clings to this famous density, inertia of experience, of matter, of earth, of the stuff. No wonder that the greatest, arguably, spiritual movie director, the Russian Tarkovsky, was at the same time practically obsessed by the topic of inertia of matter, density of matter, matter in decay. In his films, when heroes are praying, they don't pray looking upwards. They pray by sometimes literally immersing their heads into mud, with close contact with earth. So I think the thing to do today is to oppose to this kind of spiritual materialism the pure formalism of true radical materialism, which is why for me quantum physics is ultimately a deeply materialist theory, where you don't need any positivity of matter. You can do everything with purely formal oscillations and so on. So again, back to this central insight that difference comes first. Difference, how to think a difference which is prior to the elements it is the difference of. Immanuel Kant, in his in his early writings, introduces here a crucial distinction. A very strange but clear distinction. A distinction between negative judgment and indefinite judgment. That is to say, as Kant puts it, it is not the same thing to say you aren't human, and to say you are inhuman. If I say you aren't human, it simply means you are external to humanity. You are animal, divine, whatever. It's outside. But if I say as Kant puts it, if I do not simply negate a predicate, but if I affirm a non-predicate. So again, if I don't say simply you aren't human, but if I say you are inhuman, it means non-humanity, an excess over humanity, but an excess which is inherent to humanity itself. To give you another example, which will make it clear, let's just think about Stephen King, horror novels, the well-known category of the undead. We can feel the difference. If I say you aren't dead, it's not the same as saying you are undead. If I say you aren't dead, it simply means you are alive, and nothing more, nothing mysterious. But as every reader of horror novels knows, if I say you are undead, it means you are the living dead. You are alive precisely as dead. Immanuel Kant's point is that human freedom has exactly such a status. It's something which is neither nature, animals are not free, they are enslaved to their instincts, nor culture. Culture is already symbolic law, symbolic regulation. But the conclusion to be drawn from Kant and consequently from Freud and Lacan is that what cultural symbolic prohibitions try to regulate, to master, to dominate, to domesticate, whatever you want, is not directly nature, natural instincts, but it's this zero-level inhuman excess, to use Lacan's span, the extimate kernel of humanity. The inhuman dimension in exactly the same sense in which we talk about the undead. Not inhuman as external to humanity, but a monstrous excess or some radical wild freedom which is inherent to humanity itself. Again, we have this paradox that the difference between nature and culture is a level of its own, is neither nature nor culture. It's some kind of well, first, per negationem, what it would not be. It would definitely not be what emerges today more and more as the ultimate horizon of the political, the so-called identity politics, or more broadly, the politics of recognizing the differences, of tolerating differences. What is for me problematic in this multiculturalist, tolerant politics and so on, it's not just the vulgar fact that they effectively, even if they deny it, neglect economic struggle. It's the very logic of the struggle, the logic of multiculturalist struggle, of anti-racist struggle, of sexist struggle, struggle against sexism, is again the logic of recognizing differences. For example, in anti-sexist struggle, the goal, of course, is not, even for radical feminists, I don't know, to kill, to annihilate men. It's to establish an open field within which both sexes, all different sexual positions, sexual identities, cultural identities inclusive, will be allowed to thrive freely, so that one will not articulate itself at the expense of others. Again, in the anti-racist struggle, the ultimate horizon is that of opening up the space for differences. Each ethnic group, religious group, cultural group, way of life group should have the freedom to freely deploy, articulate its potentials, its position. But this conceptual field, the field of openness towards the other, of tolerating, allowing for differences as the ultimate ethical horizon, this, I claim, should not, cannot be our ultimate horizon. Because we can immediately see that, to use the simplified example, class struggle. My God, the ultimate goal of the class struggle is not for proletarians to allow the bourgeois and bourgeois to allow proletarians to freely deploy their own potentials and so on and so on. It's an antagonistic struggle. The goal is not to let the multitude be, the goal is to annihilate the enemy. It's a totally different logic. It's the logic of animosity. It's the logic of antagonistic struggle, which also involves a totally different notion of universality. The notion of universality here is no longer universality as the encompassing medium container of the plurality of positions, sexual positions, cultural positions, whatever. No, universality is here the universality of struggle itself. There is also a central paradox to this struggling position. The position of struggle does not mean the position of a particular identity and the abandonment of the universal notion of truth. The abandonment of universal notion of truth goes very well with multiculturalist politics, where you can say everybody has the right to narrate its own version of truth, there is no global truth. No, our position should be there is universal truth. There always is one universal truth of a certain situation. But this truth is accessible only from a specific, partial, engaged in the struggle standpoint. So it's not that we arrive at the universal truth by abstracting from our particular engagement, from our particular interests, the idea being each of us has its own interests, positions, but the truth of a situation emerges when we can step, as it were, outside ourselves and look at the situation more objectively, the way it really is. No, on the contrary, we should fully assume the paradox of universal truth being accessible only through a partial engaged position. This, I think, is more precious than ever to maintain today. And this is the reason why, at the social level, I think, we should cling to the notion of collective as it was till now practiced in three forms. messianic religious collectives, revolutionary parties, and psychoanalytic communities. They both share, all three of them, they share precisely this same notion of universality accessible only through an engaged, struggling, subjective position. This politics of pure difference is opposed today by another, I would call it, politics of the real, but the real of the superego, in precisely the sense I already talked about, that is to say, superego injunction, the obscene virtual superego injunction to enjoy. So how does this superego injunction function today in the hegemonic mode of social identification? To put it in extremely simplified terms, the old functioning of ethics was that of moderation. The ultimate task of ethics was to moderate it, like do it but not excessively, eat, drink, not too much, sex, not too much. It was the ethics of the proper measure. Today, I claim a different kind of ethics is emerging. An ethics which, on the one hand, allows you limitless consumption, no moderation, go to the end. But why? Because the object in itself is already deprived of its dangerous substance, as it were. The whole series of products that we find today on the market, decaf coffee, beer without alcohol, sugar without sugar, and so on and so on. That is to say, the product where you get the effect, but deprived of its potentially dangerous substance. So that today, the injunction is no longer drink coffee, but moderately. It is have as much coffee as you want, because coffee is already in itself decaffeinated coffee. Maybe the best, slightly tasteless, but what the hell, why not? The best metaphor for this product is something that I saw 2-3 years ago in Los Angeles. It's the paradox of a chocolate laxative. Of course, chocolate being that which gives you constipation. With the publicity, I remember it, still constipated, not a problem, eat more of our chocolate. So that's the paradox, that the chocolate is already its own remedy, in a kind of almost Hegelian direct coincidence of the opposites. So why is this interesting? Precisely because I claim it's not limited only to phenomena of commodities. What interests me is how we can locate the same logic, also the same paradoxical logic of a product being its own counter effect already, and also within the social field. For example, let's take the big topic of tolerance. What does it mean? I claim it has precisely the structure of chocolate laxative. That is to say, tolerance is a mode of appearance of its own opposite, of intolerance. Because what does it mean, tolerance, today? It means tolerate the differences, which again means don't harass me. Tolerance means tolerate me, means don't harass me. What does it mean, don't harass me? It means precisely don't come too close to me. If you come too close to me with your excessive enjoyment, you disturb me, you harass me. So we have then this idea that practically everything can be a form of harassment. I look at you, it's potential sexual harassment. I speak too loudly, it's verbal harassment, whatever. Everything, every over proximity of another human being can be potentially a form of harassment. And I think that this fear of harassment is precisely fundamental form of intolerance today. And so, again, I claim that when we talk about tolerance today, it means precisely tolerance as avoiding harassment, which means intolerance. It means let's tolerate each other, again, which means let's keep from each other at a proper distance from each other. Yet another chocolate laxative